Organized money.
Please like, subscribe, and hit the notification button so that more people can get exposed to organized money. Really appreciate it.
So we all remember during the pandemic that toilet paper became this hot commodity. I remember we could not find any toilet paper in any of our regular stores that we go to for groceries. And we found some like Korean website that had toilet paper. And finally we were able to get it and have it shipped. And it came and it was like a quarter of the size of a normal roll of toilet paper. It was like someone took a ray, like a gamma ray, and shrunk down the toilet paper. So that became our emergency stockpile, and it was very harrowing for us and everybody else.
So today we have a great set of guests. We have the CEO of Affiliated Foods, which is it's a food wholesaler based in Texas, it's a co-op, sells to stores, grocery stores, independents in 8 states. Randy is great. You're gonna love him. And then the other person is a lawyer lobbyist in DC named Chris Jones, and he is actually a very creative anti-monopoly lobbyist lawyer. You don't meet many of those. And this one, I think it is fair to call it the tyranny of the dollar store.
Yeah, or the tyranny of Walmart. But I mean, the interesting thing is that when we couldn't find, I don't have a Walmart near me. I live in Los Angeles. There's one pretty far away. We couldn't find in the regular stores these materials during the pandemic, but they were all available in Walmart. And this episode will explain why and why that's still a problem 5 years after COVID, that they still have trouble, independent grocers, sourcing materials that you can find in abundance at Walmart.
All right, organized money. Randy and Chris, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us.
Hey, thank you.
Okay, so we usually start with the Jewish mother part of the show, where we brag about the credentials of our guests. Sometimes I adopt a terrible accent. I'm not going to do that today. I just don't feel like it. Don't have it in me. But I'll start with Chris. Chris Jones is the Chief Government Relations Officer and Counsel at the National Grocers Association. He is a lawyer in Washington, D.C., and he has really taken an obscure antitrust law that's really important called the Robinson-Patman Act, hadn't been enforced for 40 years. He has really put it on the map, and that is a law prohibiting price discrimination.
All right. Yes. Sorry, I do this part. And Randy Arceneaux, you're the president and CEO of Affiliated Foods in Amarillo, Texas, a cooperative of retailers in 8 states, serving 1,500 employers, $1.7 billion in volume, owns a bakery, a dairy, a bottled water plant, meat cutting and produce facilities, and has partnered with a vertical growing operation named Bushwood Acre Farms to provide tomatoes and peppers. That is some operation. Congratulations on your success, and we're excited to talk to you about it.
Thank you.
Well, let's start with you. You have said in past articles that the average consumer has no idea what it takes to get a grocery on a shelf for them to buy. And I think I speak for Matt and myself when I say we are average consumers.
Right.
And we don't have that information. So, tell me about that. What does it take, to get a piece of meat or a tomato or whatever onto the shelf, and how does your business serve that interest?
Well, first of all, we are a grocery wholesaler, right? So you can when you look at any piece of business, there's usually a middleman that falls in the arena of the operations. And we are that person. So we're the middleman between the manufacturer and the customer that we service, and actually goes one more step further, the consumer that buys those products. So going back to your question earlier about the average consumer not understanding what it takes to get items on the shelf, My favorite example that I like to use always is the good old banana. In the produce departments and the stores that we all shop at, the banana is usually the number one selling item in the produce department. What people don't realize is bananas are grown in Guatemala, right? So the farmer has to plant bananas, right? Harvest them. Then we put them in boxes. They ship them on containers over the ocean. We pick them up in Galveston, Texas. We transport them here to our facility. We put them in gassing rooms, as they refer to it, because a banana is gourd green when it arrives. So last time you had a banana, I'm sure you didn't choose a gourd green one to eat with your cereal and milk. So then we ripen them and get them to that beautiful yellow color that you like to buy as a consumer. So we ripen them. We get orders from our customers. We select the bananas according to how many cases they purchased. We load them on a truck. We deliver them to the store. The store receives them. The produce guy puts them on the rack, and you, the consumer, expects them for 50 cents a pound. So when you think about that for 1 second, I feel sorry for the guy that's growing them. He can't be making any money because when you take all those steps involved in transporting them and the cost to do that, and yet the average consumer does pay 50 cents a pound for bananas every day. So I always say that, I always use that example because the consumer has no clue what it takes to get the products that they're looking for in a grocery store and at the price they expect it to be at. Canned vegetables, anything down the grocery aisle, same process. Manufacturer has to manufacture it, right? The same process goes through all the different channels, and yet they expect to buy a can of corn on the shelf for 59 cents. And so, whether that's the right price point or not, is the price point we have spoiled Americans to for many, many, many decades. And it's it was challenging, especially during the pandemic, trying to help the consumer understand why we had no product on the shelf.
So your customers are, you're a wholesaler, so your customers are the stores, not the end consumers. How did you get into the business?
Well, in 1946, there was 5 grocery guys that came together and said, you know what, we're all trying to buy products for our stores on our own. If we came together and opened our own cooperative, our own wholesaler, that would give us more buying power so we could get a better cost of goods and have more of an efficient model of distribution to our own stores. And that's how we started. 5 guys got together, sitting on a milk crate behind one of these grocery stores with a banker and financed us. And here we are 80 years later. We service over 700 locations doing $1.7 billion a year. And I mentioned earlier, we're a cooperative. So we're member owned. Uh, you have to join our co-op. You have to pay, stock pricing, and there's a whole model that we follow for them to be a member. And then we take all of our profits every year and rebate them back to the customers that own this warehouse. So we're not the typical Wall Street, conglomerate that people pay attention to on the stock market every day. We're owned by individual grocery men and women throughout the 8-state region that we service. I like to refer to them as the mom and pops of the world, right? We all grew up in the community that we had a local IGA, or we had a local Piggly Wiggly, or we had a local Tony's Food Mart in the town that we grew up in, and we still service those customers today.
So you're like big mom and pop.
Big mom,
Big mom and
yes.
pop.
Some locations are big mom and pop, some not so much.
And then we have big mom and pop's lobbyists here. Chris, I don't want to sully you with that word as a negative.
I'll have to get new business cards now, I think.
But tell us what, just give us a sense of what you do. You're obviously a lawyer. You're someone who thinks about policy at a trade association. Tell us about, what you do as a counsel there.
And
Sure.
let me just, can I just, I want to chime in because I've known Chris for a while. He's not just a sort of DC lawyer. He's an important part of the anti-monopoly kind of arguments, right? He's somebody who's taken these arguments and turned them into law. So this is not some
Did he freeze?
Yes.
Yes, I think so. Why don't you go ahead with your answer, and then hopefully he'll jump back on.
Darn right, as he is he's singing my praises. Oh well. Um, so I am Chris Jones. I'm the head of relations and counsel at the National Grocers Association. So we represent independent supermarkets like all of Randy's retail customers, and then the wholesalers like Randy who services all of them. So my job in DC is really to go to battle on behalf of our membership. And my main focus over the years has been really targeted towards retail competition, antitrust, and really just trying to get the wholesalers like Randy a fair shake so that the communities that his independent grocers serve can get the prices that they expect when they go to the grocery store.
Great.
So Randy, I have just a lot of questions about the food business. So I want to start with, your basic crowd pleaser. You kind of got into this a little bit earlier, which is today, right? I think you talked a little bit about how food has been inexpensive for a long time, that 59-cent can of corn or the 50-cent banana per pound of banana. But I think it's gotten over the last couple of years, we've seen tremendous inflation in the food sector. And I guess my question is, why are prices so high? And as a kid, right, I remember prices being pretty low, but also prices being lower in the US than they are in other countries. And now it's kind of the opposite. So I'm wondering if you have any insight, like what happened to bring prices up so high recently? Obviously COVID. And then why is there this kind of flip where stuff is expensive in the US, food is expensive in the US, and it's not as expensive abroad?
Well, first of all, you were right in saying that COVID pretty much started this whole issue that we're dealing with on pricing, right? Supply and demand controls grocery pricing, just like it controls automobile pricing, home pricing. Everything is based on supply and demand. Well, we all know during COVID, supply and demand went out the window, right? The demand was super high and the supply was very low. And so I will tell you that today we are still trying to recover from COVID in certain areas of the grocery store. Producers still have not caught up production to meet back the demands of the consumer. We have that in many, many areas today. And as long as you continue to have the high demand and still not the adequate supply, you're going to see strong pricing. A lot of other things impacted that. Freight cost impacted the cost of goods as we transport them across the country or from abroad. The cost to do so went up, which becomes part of the cost of goods. Not to mention, COVID put us into a situation, the government was trying, well, I say the government, Congress was trying to pass or had discussions about increasing minimum wage. Well, they didn't have to pass one law to increase minimum wage. COVID increased minimum wage. As we had more and more people staying at home, not wanting to participate in the workforce on a daily basis. The need for associates in our company continue to grow and grow and grow because we couldn't get anyone to come to work. So what at the time we had a beginning starting pay of about $14 an hour prior to COVID in our warehouse facility. Now we're at $21 an hour. And it took us that to get people to come back to work into the workforce and to compete. I mean, in our market, we had McDonald's paying $18 an hour to flip a burger. And I don't mean that I don't want to diminish the role they play, but at the same time, when we have operations that require certain skill set, we had to up our game to this higher cost of labor. Well, cost of labor reflects into cost of operations. Inflated cost of operations goes into cost of goods, which goes to cost of goods at the retail store, and the consumer sees that. And unfortunately, I'm a big believer that we're not going to see a whole lot of price declines coming from the manufacturers. Matter of fact, we have not seen price declines come from the manufacturers since COVID. We have continually, on a year-to-year basis, seen food inflation from 2.5% to as high as 4%, continuous every year. And I think we're going to continue to see that. And one of the components that affects us is
But why? Why are you? I mean, yes, COVID was a thing that happened, but it's 2025. Why are food manufacturers continuing to why is pricing strong from 2.5 to 4% a year from the manufacturers?
Well, cost of operations. As I said earlier, they having labor increases. They're having cost of raw manufacturing goods are increasing. I'm not even bringing up the tariff situation, which is a whole different element that we may be facing here very shortly. And we have had a lot of discussion in roundtable meetings. How do we handle a 25% increase in cost of goods? And how do we pass that on to the consumer? That's another element we haven't really dealt with yet. We're a week away from the possibility of that happening. But there's
We call that
costs.
Liberation Day, Randy.
You call
That's what we call it.
All right. And then we also got to remember, because of the demand going up in a lot of different categories since COVID, these manufacturers have begun to build and roll out new manufacturing facilities. Well, you don't put one of those up for $100, right? Those things are very costly, and that goes back into the cost of goods, and it flows back down to the consumer at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So I think we're going to continue to see, parts of that play back down into cost of goods as we move forward.
And then there are your costs. And when you were going through just sort of the life cycle of a banana, I thought it was really interesting. The fact that you're actually ripening them. Obviously, they're not tree. If they were tree ripened, we'd be in big trouble. It'd be black by the time they got to the grocery store. So, but the fact that you have to do all that, I mean, what's interesting to me is the tech that goes into your operation. People think like, oh, tech's only for Amazon, tech's only for these super new and cool companies. But it sounds like there's a lot of technology that goes into your business. Could you tell me about that?
Well, there's a ton of technology. Again, I think someone mentioned earlier, we have our own dairy, so we bottle milk. Well, there's a ton of technology in the automation process of that. Plus, again, going back to the labor force, I can't just get anybody off the street to come work in our dairy. We have to have skilled labor and understanding of automation. Same thing in our bakery, same thing in our meat cutting processing facility. All of those areas, and to your point, when it comes to ripening bananas, there's a true art to doing that. Trust me, it could go one way bad or one way really bad. And again, it takes a skilled individual to do that, and you have to pay a higher wage to have those skilled individuals to be part of your staff.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a slightly different, this is an obligatory question in every DC panel. Are you looking at AI in your operation? If the answer is no, I will be very happy.
Well, the only thing we have used AI for was a marketing campaign, period.
There you go.
Okay.
That is it. Nothing else.
All right.
And that was to give us, some ideas on going to market with a certain campaign we were launching. That is the only time we have ever used it.
Okay.
That's good to hear. Look what you're leaving on the table. So you're a co-op. You work with a bunch of grocery stores, but they're all of more of the independent local variety. What is it like to compete with some of the big boys out there, like Walmart, for example? I mean, what advantages do they have over you, and what do you do to compensate for that?
Well, first of all, yes, we do service all independent operators. That's who we are, like most of the grocery cooperatives in the country. Well, Walmart's the mammoth, and we're out there with our bow and arrow every day trying to beat that animal. There's no secret. They're a force. They're their own. Sometimes I consider them as their own country. I mean, they operate efficiently. You can't take that away from them. I can't tell you they're a bad retailer because they do a lot of great things, right? But the one thing that they do better than anybody, and a lot of that has to do with their buying power, is the ability to dictate with the manufacturers what they expect and what they deserve in their mind, what they deserve. And I mean, if you go back and look at the history of Walmart, there have been manufacturers that may have been small to middle-sized manufacturers that eventually went out of business because they put all their eggs in that one basket. And then when Walmart would dictate pricing and they couldn't honor that pricing because of cost of the operations, then a lot of them just went away. They went out of business. But you have the big players, the Procter & Gambles of the world, the Kellogg's of the world, General Mills of the world, that are big, but Walmart in some cases is still 25 to 30% of their overall volume. And that's one customer dictating, 35 or 40 in some cases percent of the profit and loss statement that they're managing as a company every day, the production that's put forth. And so because of that ability to offer that volume, they utilize that their size to beat up on a vendor. I mean, there's no secret. Everybody in the industry knows that's how it works. Well, unfortunately for us, most of the manufacturers give in to Walmart's ask. Well, if you have a P&L and you're a Fortune 500 company and you're reporting to Wall Street and you got a bunch of investors that expect X amount on the bottom line, how do you get there? If you're taking the largest customer and giving them something no one else gets, well, then you got to charge me more and you got to charge somebody else more in order to accommodate the profit and loss statement that's expected by the stockholders in that company. So I always refer to my company and other wholesalers and the independent channel as the subsidizers to Walmart. We subsidize Walmart through costs to give them what they need to be the lowest price in the markets that we serve.
Yeah, this is an antitrust show. So we throw around the term gatekeeper a lot, and particularly in the tech market. So, like Apple being a gatekeeper in the market for apps, or Amazon in the e-commerce market. It's really not any different with Walmart in the grocery marketplace. If they're anywhere, depending on how you frame the market, they're up to a third of U.S. grocery sales. So that gives them the same kind of gatekeeping power that we observe in the tech markets in grocery, because if you are a supplier, if you are one of those large suppliers that Randy named, you have to do business with Walmart if you want to reach American consumers. So for most suppliers, Walmart is anywhere between 20 to 30% of your domestic sales. But if you flip that around, for Walmart, that supplier is like a decimal point. So it creates this bargaining asymmetry that allows Walmart to do exactly what Randy is going through. They dictate terms, they squeeze the suppliers so much that they have no choice but to increase costs on everybody else in the marketplace. And what really lit this problem on fire is going back to the COVID example we talked about. Prices went up. Walmart didn't want to pay higher prices. So they basically said, find another way to make up for your cost of production increases. And they did it on the backs of the independent grocer.
So I want to ask Randy something quickly and then get back to you, Chris, to talk about the Robinson-Patman Act. But I want to kind of put myself in the mindset of kind of a normal American consumer who's kind of heard arguments about how things work. And it's like, what I would say is, well, Walmart is just really good at getting low prices. They're really efficient. And, that's capitalism, right? You have Walmart or any of the big guys, they're just better at, sort of delivering stuff cheaper. Not like, oh, well, there's some sort of unfairness here, because unfairness, you could say, is maybe part of the system or not. But I guess the question I would have is, you're kind of saying, no, that's actually not what's going on. Walmart is, maybe they are more efficient in some ways, or maybe they're less efficient in some ways. It depends on the operator you're comparing them to, but they're just getting better prices, right, from the manufacturer. They're just getting a price advantage only because they're big, not because they are better at anything. Is that a fair characterization of what you're saying, Randy?
I will tell you that's yes. And let me explain that just a second. So I've been doing this for 40 years. So I've been around the block a little bit in the grocery industry. If you get a price list from a manufacturer, let's use Procter & Gamble. So Charmin, we all know what Charmin is, right? The price list they give you, the best bracket you can buy in is called a truckload. So you can buy, half a truck, 3/4 of a truck, and your price is different, right? Mm-hmm. So if a manufacturer tells me their best bracket is a truckload, that tells me that's their most efficient way of you turning in an order and you buying from them. Well, at a $1.7 billion wholesale business, we buy truckloads of many, 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 many items every day. I will tell you that same truckload of Charmin that I'll buy, one SKU, full load, my cost will be higher than Walmart selling it to the consumer in their store.
Wow.
And you can't get more efficient than one item, one solid truckload, because you can't put any product on top of the truck and expect it to ride down the road. So a truckload is a truckload is a truckload. And that's where I get into a lot of heated discussions with the manufacturers, is the fact that I'm meeting the criteria of a full truckload single item, but yet my cost is higher than Walmart's retail to the consumer.
Okay. So getting back to you, Chris, is that legal?
No, it's not. It's not supposed to be legal. The Robinson-Patman Act prohibits that. But
Wait,
if
so
there
what
are,
is Robinson-Patman Act? Because
Yeah,
I
we
think
should.
this is
Yeah.
really shocking that when most people hear about it, they think, well, that's fine. But to hear that charging two different customers different prices for the same item, to hear that that's illegal when it's a commodity is, I think, a real shock. So can you talk about what is the Robinson-Patman Act and explain why that's not actually legal?
Yeah. So Robinson-Patman Act is an antitrust law that dates back to the 1930s, the Great Depression. And the idea is that if Randy is purchasing in the same quantity, the truckload quantity, as a larger retailer, his larger competitor, he should get the same price for that. Now, if Walmart can make the case that, they're buying 100 truckloads versus Randy's 5 truckloads or whatever it may be is more efficient, they can get a discount based on the actual efficiencies created. If it lowers the marginal cost of production, for example, for the manufacturer. But we have basically decided that Robinson-Patman doesn't make sense in this day and time. We decided this 40 years ago. And so the law is just constantly being violated and evaded by the market participants and players because they don't have any fear of enforcement. There's supposed to be enforced by the Federal Trade Commission and the DOJ. And they've really stopped looking at this problem for about 40 years up until recently.
Yeah, and recently there were a couple cases that were brought by the FTC. Obviously, that was the FTC under Chair Lena Khan. And, it's a little bit uncertain where they're going to go. But maybe you could summarize these two cases. One of them involves Walmart to a certain degree. So could you tell us about the two separate RPA cases that have been filed?
Sure. Yeah. So ever since COVID, when we started raising this problem up, there have been a number of investigations that we found out about the FTC had been undertaking. And those culminated in two major cases that were filed over the last several months. So in December, there was a case against an alcohol wholesaler named Southern Glacier. So they're by far the biggest distributor of alcohol products. And alcohol is a little bit different of a system than the grocery world that we live in because it's more regulated, so it's a little more transparent from a wholesale standpoint. So we know you could tell pretty easily that mom and pop, wine and liquor stores were getting much higher prices than the Total Wines, the larger, wine and alcohol stores, or the Walmarts, for example. So that, without the efficiency justification that violates the law, and it wasn't, terribly hard, I think, for the FTC to find that. So they filed a lawsuit alleging that this wholesaler, was undermining the Robinson-Patman Act. And that was the first case filed in court in about 40 years. There was a settlement back in the year 2000, but it was the first real shot out of the gun from the FTC in December. More recent case was against PepsiCo. So that lawsuit is largely redacted right now. It's in federal court in New York. But the case was filed against PepsiCo for violating the Robinson-Patman Act as well, and providing a large big box store, which we think is probably Walmart, a better price relative to everyone else in the marketplace.
A large big box store with the initials WM.
That rhymes with small mart.
That is completely redacted.
I have read these cases, a lot of these complaints, and they are always redact stuff, and it's so stupid and annoying because this is supposed to be public. Sorry, I'm going to stop ranting, but it was so obviously Walmart.
We would like to see it too, for sure.
Yeah. And one of the biggest issues we're having is the fact that we've allowed the vendor community to create these classes of trade. That's really the culprit here, is where you have what they consider us as a grocery outlet, deep discounters like a Walmart, the dollar channel, the convenience channel. And then that's their argument. Oh, well, wait a minute. Your pricing's this because you're in the grocery channel.
Yeah.
Their pricing is this because they're the mass merchandiser. Well, last time I looked, Mrs. Jones lives in our same town that me and the Walmart mass merchandiser lives in. And we're both fighting for Mrs. Jones to buy, Fruit Loops
Yeah.
or whatever.
Right.
Well, I'm at a disadvantage from the beginning because they reclassified them to give them a better pricing model than they will give to the grocery channel.
Right. We decided to give you a worse price because the nerds in our station have decided that you're in a different seating arrangement.
That's
So
correct.
whatever it is. Yeah. Um, so okay, so I think one of the things that was a big deal and actually broke through the news around the grocery store world is the Kroger-Albertsons attempted merger, which failed, and the Federal Trade Commission filed suit as well as a bunch of states and blocked that merger. Um, but I want to ask about the rationale for that merger, because one of the things that came up in the trial was that Albertsons executives were saying, and Albertsons is huge. It's a what, $24 billion company or something. It's like a massive company, but they were saying, look, we can't get good pricing compared to Walmart, and that's why we have to merge. Is that was that the rationale for the merger that they just couldn't, or was that a key rationale for the merger? And I mean, Randy, put on your pundit hat and tell us what you think.
Well, I would tell you that I think it's a big part of it and that's why we read a lot of articles about creating another big player in the market that was going to beat up on the vendor community. Matter of fact, I think it was an article that the CEO even made that suggestion that this would give him the leverage to leverage on the major manufacturers for better cost of goods.
Yeah.
And I don't think he was trying to keep that a secret. So we were creating another mega player in the marketplace that only would impact negatively the independent operator once more again.
They were basically saying no fair. Walmart gets to knuckle under the suppliers. Why don't we get to do that? It's just a bizarre. And the other interesting thing about that trial is just what you were just saying about segmenting the market and how they justify the way in which they price by saying, "Oh, well, you're not in Walmart's category." Kroger and Albertsons were trying to do kind of the opposite in that case. They were saying, no, we compete with Walmart. We compete with all these other players. We compete with Amazon. We compete with online grocers. And that's why this is such a big, happy family. And if we merge, we're just a small part of that. So it's interesting that when it suits their needs, they'll say it's a big, melting pot. But when it doesn't suit their needs, they'll say, oh, no, we get a particular pricing because we're a different category.
That's right. That's exactly what happened.
So, all right. It's an interesting problem because we've got this price discrimination law that I don't think most people knew about until relatively recently. And that is, in fact, driving consolidation in the industry, making it harder. It's something called, I think it's called the waterbed effect, from what I understand, where it's like I guess that term was coined in the 70s when people used waterbeds.
When everyone loved waterbeds.
It was super into waterbeds. But you would sit on in the center of the waterbed and everything else would kind of rise up. So the idea is Walmart or Procter and Gamble is kind of one of the big suppliers or one of the big vendors or one of the big buyers. They would raise their prices or lower their prices, as the case may be, to the big guys. And then everybody else would take worse terms, like a waterbed in the 1970s. I don't, whatever. There we go. I didn't invent it, but that's the term that economists like to use because they're all living in the 70s.
Yeah, it's very real. For suppliers, you have to meet a profit margin level. And if your biggest buyer is squeezing you to the point of you're not being profitable, you are kind of left without a choice, but then to discriminate, but then to violate the Robinson-Patman Act and increase costs on your smaller customers. And that creates this unlevel playing field that we think is bad for our ability to compete, and it's bad for the consumer. And kind of going back to your point, Matt, of this consolidation era, all of this we believe is a byproduct of a lack of enforcement of the Robinson-Patman Act, because what it does, instead of like incentivizing larger buyers to then pass those savings on to consumers, it incentivizes them to get bigger and stronger so that they can muscle suppliers more, so that they can actually take more margin and outcompete their competitors. So it provides them a moat around themselves so they don't actually have to compete. It's why Randy is probably more efficient than the Walmarts of the world. He has to be efficient in order to compete and get costs low for his customers and their consumers. Whereas if you're just big enough to squeeze every dollar and cent out of a supplier, the incentive isn't there to actually be efficient. It's backwards from what a lot of folks believed to be the case 40 years ago.
Yeah. Randy, you said something earlier when we were talking about the categorization and that there's, mass market category and different categories. But one of them you mentioned was dollar store categories. Now, that's interesting. I mean, obviously, we've seen just a massive proliferation of these. I once was driving in West Virginia and I saw a Dollar General attached to a Family Dollar. Like they were that was the so-called competition that you had there. It was $2 stores butted up against one another. And I'm wondering, first of all, what does their pricing look like relative to maybe the people that you deal with? And why have we seen this proliferation of dollar stores across the country?
Well, first of all, they are a challenge for us as well. If you look at our customer base and most of the wholesalers in this country that service independents, a lot of the towns our stores are in, they're the only grocery store, right?
Mm.
But now they have a Dollar General and a Family Dollar that has opened up on top of them in these small communities, and they come in and take a big chunk of the business from the independent operator. And the problem with that is the dollar channel does not do fresh.
Mm-hmm.
So what happens is they take a lot of the volume from your, inline grocery or your cleaning aisle, your paper aisle, and then the consumer has to go to the independent to get fresh. Well, the independent needs every area of that store to do well in order for him to survive in that marketplace. Because if that independent goes out of business, that whole community no longer has fresh food. They have canned food, packaged food, but they have no fresh offering in that community. And I wanted to say this earlier. That's one of the things that Walmart has done to so many of our communities. How many times have you driven through rural America and go to what we used to call the downtown area that
Mm-hmm.
no longer is a downtown area? Because at one time there was a local hardware store, a local pharmacy, local grocery store, might have been a clothing store. And Walmart came to the outskirts of that town and put every one of those people out of business. And once all those people are out of business, all of a sudden the pricing that Walmart brought to the community is different, right? Get rid of competition and you can go up on your pricing. So they have helped to create what I call food deserts throughout our whole country. And that's a problem because when these little towns are looking for a grocery store to go back into these food deserts, guess who they call? They don't call Walmart because Walmart created it. They call the independent or they call us as a wholesaler saying, hey, look, we really need a grocery store back in our town. Our people, our consumers are traveling 30 and 40 miles to get fresh food now.
Yeah.
And it makes it cost prohibitive to go back to these towns and open a store from ground up.
It's a healthcare issue. I mean,
Yeah.
I hear from I go to these healthcare conferences and they use the term food is medicine,
Sure.
and then they have dessert afterwards after the conference. But but
Here's some Doritos.
if you're putting someone in that position where the most convenient thing for them is going to be to stock up on the ultra processed foods. I mean, that's a medical issue.
It is.
So I guess, well, actually, yeah, there's been studies, showing that Walmart is responsible for some parts of the obesity, like a Walmart opens in a Walmart supercenter opens and then obesity rates go up in that area. But I'm interested in, so you talked about how dollar stores are coming in into some small town to get it has one grocer, a dollar store comes in, or there's a Walmart nearby. Is the dollar store also a Robinson-Patman phenomenon? Are they getting better pricing on their paper products and their packaged foods and stuff like that? Are they also getting other subsidies that are not
They
available?
are. Same thing. We have the same issue that we have with Walmart with the dollar channel. And again, at the end of the day, Chris, I don't know the number off the top of my head, but I think there's over what, 30,000 dollar stores. So you think about the buying power that $30,000 stores have. However, when you look at it on an individual basis, they're about as the most inefficient operator that exists in any market. I don't know if you've ever walked through one, if you can walk through it. They have two employees.
It's true. The aisles are really cluttered. Like,
Yeah.
it's actually really annoying. I had because I was in one the other day with my baby, and it was like it was actually hard to get through. Sorry. Oh, go on. I'm just like,
It's fine. But I mean, they have two employees in the store.
Yeah.
So they're not really, putting a lot of people to work anywhere, but they too use their volume, same way as Walmart with these manufacturers, to not only get a better cost, but to make the manufacturer produce certain items that are not available to anyone else. And it goes back to that class of trade I talked about earlier, because we get that used against us all the time. If we want a club pack, that was the trade group I forgot to mention earlier, like the Sam's or the Costco's of the world.
Mm-hmm.
If I want one of those trade packs, oh, I'm sorry, that's for this club segment. Oh, I want this smaller bottle, dish liquid or whatever it is. Oh, that's the dollar channel size. And so a lot of times we don't even have the opportunity to carry the same items that our competitors carry because they classify them for a different class of trade. I do a lot of top-to-top meetings with all our manufacturers. We sit down and look at our year in review, where our business is, how do we grow it, and what's been impacting us. One of the most interesting things when we talk about subsidizing Walmart or the dollar channel, it's how we subsidize the manufacturer. And what I say by that is 9 out of 10 times, if the manufacturer produces in 100 items, we carry 85, but you go to Walmart and they only carry 40. And so we are selling another 40 different items at different margins to help subsidize the P&L of that manufacturer. Because one of the things that we have always tried to do in the independent world is to offer a variety to the consumer that walks in. Again, we're getting our brains beat out on pricing. So we got to give them great meat, great produce, great service, and variety to try to differentiate ourselves in the marketplace. So when you look at that, and I remind the vendor when I'm visiting with them, we're carrying your full line, but yet you allow Walmart to carry half of the items I'm carrying, but yet you're letting them beat my brains out on those 40 items. And I'm having to subsidize you as a vendor with these other items that are not as competitive. So you're making more margins off of us, and we're supporting that habit. And, I think we got to sometimes we need to look at that. Maybe we need to carry 40 items. But at the end of the day, we still try to hang our hat on try to differentiate ourselves with variety in the marketplace.
The ironic thing about the dollar store is they'll come into a community of like 1,200, let's say. There's an IGA grocery store, and they will file a zoning permit under a grocery store designation and locate like in the same shopping center or across the street. They're also able to expeditiously get a SNAP license, a food stamp license, so they can process food stamp benefits, even though they really do the bare minimum when it comes to fresh and perishability. And then they'll go to the manufacturer and say, look, we don't compete with the grocery store. So we want, special pricing, and we want special package sizes. We want smaller package sizes than the IGAs because we cater to a different type of customer base. But of course, to like a consumer, when you're experiencing high inflation, you're going to cut across the parking lot to go to the dollar store if the product is cheaper. So
Sure.
Say there's a town of 1,200, you need to sustain as much volume as possible for that grocery store to be profitable. So you have consumers being picked off going to the dollar store. A lot of times that's the death knell for that community.
Well, and again, as we talked about earlier, the supermarket in that town has to hire skilled labor. I mean, you have to have meat cutters, produce operators. You have to have skilled labor. The dollar store needs 2 cashiers. And I'm not saying a cashier is not skilled labor, but you understand what I'm saying. A meat cutter and a produce manager is completely different. So you're having to pay more for wages, and you're supporting that community with a lot more jobs, but yet you're fighting, to Chris's point, packaging differences. And what I mean by that, we may carry a 98-ounce Tide. They get an 85-ounce Tide package for them. And guess what? The bottle looks the same. It just has less liquid in it. So to the consumer's eye, unless they're doing math by the ounce, they don't realize that, they're $3 cheaper than we are, but they got less product for it.
So they're paying less money, but they're
Yeah.
just getting less.
That's
So
shrinkflation, right? I mean,
Well, you can call it that, but for the consumer, if you got $6 to spend, well, then that works for them, right?
yep.
And
it's
and
a it,
so, and when we go to the vendor saying, "Hey, we want," as we refer to them in the market, the cheater packs. Hey, we want some of those cheater packs to have that same price impression. Nope, that's a dollar
I,
channel.
I love
that
that.
seems like a problem to be like, we want a cheater, we want a
Yeah.
cheater pack. I remember like during the financial crisis, they were like, I was learning about finance at the time. I started working in Congress, and they were like, "Oh no, the liar's loan segment is
Yeah.
going bad." And I was like, "Well, there are loans
Maybe
called
that's the
liar's loans.
problem, that
That
they're
seems
called
like
liars loans. Yeah.
that seems not good." We want cheater packs. Yeah. No, it feels like that's actually a form of deception, right? Which, I mean, when I say it feels, I mean, I guess they're called cheater packs.
They are.
Yeah,
That's
man.
what we
So,
refer to them as cheetah pack. But think about it. Think about it in the average consumer that's shopping.
Oh, they'll have
He
no
looks at
idea.
it as a value.
right. As an average consumer, I am a total idiot, and I will take the 85-cent one over the
Yeah.
99-cent.
I
I
mean,
just will.
I mean,
Right.
some of your better grocery stores actually put the per ounce price, underneath the price tag. But I can't believe that a lot of people look at that.
No, they do not.
Okay. So I want to ask a different. So I want to get to like one of my pet peeves. I'm a broken human being, so my pet peeves are not normal, but it's credit card costs, which seem like crazy. If I give you a $20 bill, you get all $20, right? If I want to charge $20 on my credit card, whatever, 1 to 3% goes to Visa, MasterCard, and banks. And then if my $20 bill is counterfeit, you have the Secret Service that deals with it. If my credit card is there's some sort of identity theft or something, I have to deal with it, or the store has to deal with it with insurance. So it's like you're getting, that it's just like a private sales tax. Now, I wonder, does Walmart, do the dollar stores, do they get better pricing on credit cards? And then also, is this a monopoly that is, or a triopoly or whatever you want to call it, Visa, MasterCard, Discover. Is this something, American Express, is this something that's a significant cost center to you guys? Not, I guess, not your customers, but your customers'
To
customers.
merchants. Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
is there a price discrimination element here as well?
There is. Matter of fact, I think if you can go look at, I forgot how long ago it was, Chris, where they pulled in Visa, MasterCard into a hearing, and they actually asked that question, and they really didn't want to answer
Hmm.
truthfully that Walmart got a better rate,
Yeah.
transaction rate than we can get. But they did say because of Walmart's size that there are different contracts, basically, is how they worded it. But our average grocery store that we service, credit card fees is the second largest expense on their P&L, second only to labor expense. It's
Mm.
more than the electric bill, most cases more than their rent on the building. It's more than everything else except labor. And what and to your point, if Walmart's getting a 1% or a 0.5% transaction fee, and I got a retailer sitting at 3, not only is he getting his brain bashed in on cost of goods from Tide, he's also paying another 2 to 2.5% more than Walmart on the transaction to sell the Tide that he's already too high on.
Right.
Yeah,
It's
that
like
was
you have a
actually
much
Just
higher
make
rent.
question
them even
from
worse.
that was actually a question from Republican Senator Josh Hawley, and Visa and MasterCard both admitted to giving discounts on volume arrangements to Walmart. But believe it or not, this is an area where we, put our arms together with Walmart, the dollar stores, all the other merchants as a community, because this is a duopoly. You've got 80% of credit card processing goes through Visa and MasterCard. So they can set prices. They operate as a cartel. If you're issuing bank, they will discipline you if you charge differently than default interchange. So all that does is we're down to, Randy and his customers don't have a choice in the matter. They make a buck off of $100 worth of groceries. And if you're using one of those high rewards cards, Visa and MasterCard are making $2 to $4. And it makes us crazy.
Now, I know, Chris, there is legislation to deal with this in Washington, the Credit Card Competition Act, bipartisan bill.
Right.
There were seeming attempts to get this, kind of wedge it into some other bill. What is the state of play on that right now? And, what are the merchants that you work with doing to try to get some more level playing field there?
Yeah, I think we're expecting the bill to be introduced sometime soon. Congress just got back into session after a break. We're obviously pushing for a vote on that. I think the biggest challenge that we have is that, the banks have all of our money. So they use
That is a big challenge.
So yeah, they're using hundreds of millions of dollars to try to stop this and scaring senators and staff. They'll drive up a donut truck to the Senate office buildings and offer free donuts to staff, or buy out a bar, giving free drinks. Trying to, say don't vote on this bill because you're gonna miss out on all your rewards.
Well, I live in Washington, D.C., so I like that.
Because you
I'm
like
on the other
donuts.
side. I'm on the other side of that one from you guys,
Yeah.
but agree to disagree.
Yeah, I don't think so, Matt. I think you're getting screwed too here. So
Probably.
$1,200 a family.
I'm buying the cheater pack.
Yeah.
But what I think is so funny is that, use our card and you get 1% cash back, but they're charging you 3 at the register.
Right.
I don't want to hear it.
I mean, it's a
1%
fact.
cash back.
Yeah.
I'm getting cash back. It's
I like the
awesome.
cash back idea.
Yeah, but you're
That's
still
all I
paying,
think of.
right? You're paying for it in cost of goods.
Well, that's what
You're
they call a
paying more than the
two-sided
1%.
market there.
We have to raise our costs to accommodate those,
Yes.
3% transaction costs.
Yeah.
And so the people who actually lose in this transaction are the lowest income. So if you
ultimately
use a SNAP card or cash or a debit card, you don't have the same level of transaction fees. You're still paying at that higher price that otherwise would be lower
Sure.
if we had lower costs in terms of our.
So this is kind of like painting a picture of kind of at almost every level, being an independent grocer, you have a disadvantage vis-a-vis somebody who's large and powerful and is closer to Wall Street, right? And, they probably I know I've read this, they've got tax subsidies for, because you talk about how the towns will call you to get a grocer in there, but they will also give tax subsidies to dollar store to get someone in there, right? And so
Sure.
there's all sorts of advantages. I know I saw Walmart is often in electric utility rate dockets. So there are elements here where they're trying to get cost advantages in every context that doesn't have anything to do with efficiencies. But I guess I want to get to a slightly different. I want to move back to something we talked about earlier in the interview, which is where you said you're not back to where you were prior to the pandemic. And I guess, do you still have problems sourcing things like baby formula or
Yes.
other items and then I guess that's not a pandemic thing, but that was like what are you having trouble getting?
What's interesting about the baby formula, that's what, 2 years ago we had that issue?
Yeah.
We're still getting 40% of what we order.
40%.
40% service level 2 years later, which I just can't understand why.
And what are some of the other products that 5 years after the pandemic you're still struggling to locate?
Believe it or not, the pet food category is probably the worst.
Really?
The pet food category is probably the worst. If you walk into an independent store, we have holes in the shelves everywhere in the pet food category. Or we've had to change our mix of products and of the items we're carrying, and carrying things that are not as popular, as I refer to it, to the consumer that the big brands are. However, I can go into a Walmart, or I can go into a Tractor Supply, or I can go into a Dollar General, or I can go into a club store and find those items that we can't get our hands on.
So when you talk about baby formula, that is just shocking. You get 40% of what you ask for or what you order. Is it like you can't get the specialty baby formulas or just all baby formulas?
All baby formula in general.
And what do they tell you when you're like, what, you only gave me 40% of what I ordered? What do they say?
Capacity problems.
Do you think it's capacity problems or what's going on there?
Well, I don't know what to believe anymore. We've been told so many different things in the last 2 years. Again, they use capacity issues. The demand's higher than the capacity.
I mean,
that's really odd. So, but I mean, that's yet another level because, as you say, if they're available, maybe not baby formula, but the pet food or whatever, if they're available in bigger stores, but you can't get your hands on them. That's yet another way where this is kind of sliced up.
It's called
And
allocations.
allocations.
I mean, everything is a conspiracy theory. Like, why aren't they just giving you what you ordered after? This is crazy. I feel like everything is like the CIA holding onto the JFK papers. It's like crazy. It's not. Sorry, I'm gonna calm down.
Yeah, I mean, this goes back to what we found during COVID. Like the reason that they're not shorting product to their largest customers is because the largest customers will find them, or they'll find some way to discipline them for not doing it. Randy does not have the bargaining power. They don't have the leverage. They just have to take as much as they can possibly buy. And we don't have buying power.
And I know there was an FTC paper about this very issue. I think Feeding America in a Time of Crisis is what it was called. And, it sounds like some of these issues at least have not been completely addressed. And Chris, I know that you're involved with something called the Main Street Coalition, which, I think in part is based on this discrepancy. Could you tell us about that? And is there a possibility sort of in greater numbers to try to remedy some of these things?
Yeah, I'll start with a COVID example. And there was a report that the FTC put out a couple years ago explaining the market dynamics here. But just to paint a picture for you, you go into one of Randy's, customer stores, an independent grocer, and you go to the paper aisle. We all remember being terrified when we could get toilet paper. But like, fortunately for you as a consumer,
I don't use toilet paper. So
well, then there you go.
I just
Well,
I don't like it. Yeah.
But you
Like a
could drive
bidet or
20
something?
miles down the road to a Walmart, and then they would have paper to the sky. The funny thing about
Right.
that, this is what got us involved, re-involved in starting the Main Street Coalition, which I'll get to, is that it didn't make any sense. Because if you think of the consumer at that time, they felt a lot more comfortable going into their local grocery store versus fighting each other for toilet paper at a Walmart. And we had data that suggested that our sales growth was almost double that of the big box segment. So Randy would go to the Procters and Gambles of the world and say, what the heck? We can move product for you faster and make you more money. Like, why can't we get any? Why are you telling us there's no product? And they would just look at him with these blank stares.
Well, what they would do, Chris, is they'd say, well, no, we based your allocations on the last 52 weeks of purchases. Well, that's wonderful, except now we're moving twice as much in a short period of time because the consumer is scared to death to go to a big store and get COVID, right?
Right.
But it didn't matter. And Walmart, they use Walmart's movement for the last 52 weeks.
Yeah,
And wasn't there something on toilet paper specifically where they said, oh, well, you have to get a 96 pack, or there was like some
It was
very
close.
large quantity
it was close
you would
to
have
that,
buy?
yes.
I like the idea. They're like,
they
we're
consolidated their manufacturing, which may be more efficient, but unfortunately for us, they consolidated around a SKU, a product that only the big box segment can purchase. And
Right.
inconvenient for us, but we would have purchased 96 packs. That would have been fine. Like, we just wanted to get it to the customer. That's all.
Here's what was crazy, David.
Yeah.
So they would say, hey, we're only going to produce 60-pack toilet paper.
Right.
And we're going to allocate it. And we look, and you never carried our 60, so you don't get any.
But that's all you're selling.
It was an item Walmart carried, so Walmart gets it. Well, I'm sorry, I can't give you allocations because you bought none from us.
Now I'm as crazy as Matt is. Like, everything is.
It's very Soviet. But one of the things that I think I can't help but thinking that you're on the retail side, right? And you're one of the littler, the small, you're reasonable size, but you're not, but you're one of the smaller buyers compared to a dollar store or or Walmart or something like that. But there have to be producers that are on the other side that are also smaller, right? And they're, so they must be seeing, like, it's not like it's not like you could go to a non-Procter and Gamble producer of toilet paper or detergent or whatever, or maybe you could, I don't know. Why isn't there competition in terms of vendors to why wasn't there where you could get toilet paper that maybe wasn't
There
Charmin?
was, but you got Procter and Gamble's the big one, actually, Charmin. Then you have Scott, and then you have Cottonelle, and you have Angel Soft, and all of those folks had the same way of doing business. Every single one of them.
And there's no entrance into the market. I mean, is on the other side, like in terms of vendors,
Well,
it's hard to break in on that side too.
well, we even have our own brand, our own private label. And private label manufacturers were doing the exact same thing that the branded manufacturers were doing. Because you only have a couple of guys that produce private label toilet paper in the country,
Really?
and they produce it for everybody. So then guess what? The big guy wins again. So even though it was our own brand, they wouldn't set you on the
You
line to
so
produce because Walmart was taking the majority of the lines.
there's like a private label, sort of an oligopoly,
Yeah, pretty much.
something like
Oh
that.
yeah,
Something
there's
like
Well,
trust me,
well,
there's a lot of this on the private label side as well.
I think private labels are fascinating. I mean, sometimes it's the exact same product. I've seen videos where people like do the chemical tests on two products. One's supposed to be generic and one's supposed to be, whatever. And it's the same product that's usually given to different market segments. But what you're saying there is that, even if it's your own private label product, you can't get your own private label product because they're still tied up with the suppliers. And that has to do with the fact that, yeah, there's kind of like concentration on that side, and they're worried about the Walmarts of the world too.
Absolutely. We opened a water plant because of a manufacturer not taking care of us during COVID. We were Niagara, which is one of the biggest bottled waters, throughout the country. We were buying now listen to this, we were buying 110 truckloads a week. 110 truckloads a week of water.
Wow.
They cut us to 10. To 10.
Man.
So we couldn't have bottled water for our customers. Go to Walmart, tons of water.
All right.
Forced us to open our own water plant and kick their you know what. So we kicked them out of the warehouse. We have the lowest cost on water for our members now, and we produce 150 truckloads a week, and we are making great money off the water. So I always tell the guy, thank you when I see him.
Yeah, I think we're
Thank you for not taking care of our business.
Yeah. Thanks for cutting my water out.
Yeah.
We had better solution.
Yeah, I think where we saw shortages, since COVID, it's really been in these areas where there's consolidation. There's just less redundancies in the supply chain. And the bigger these companies get, the more addicted they become to the strength of Walmart. And it's at Walmart and at the retail consolidation level is where we see consolidation stemming from upstream, because as a manufacturer, you have to scale up. You've got to buy the new entrants. You've got to, you have to have some power in the supply chain. You have to accommodate the scale that Walmart is demanding from you. And sometimes in the food marketplace, who does that come at the expense of? It comes at the expense of the farmer. Farmers have fewer places to sell their goods. You've got 4 major meat packers, for example. You've got fewer buyers, but we see this consolidation happening because the relentless consolidation at the retail level is just causing this to filter upstream.
So, okay, I want to close this out because I've found this interesting. We could keep talking for hours, but I want to ask a little bit about the politics here because this is a weird political sort of area, right? Anti-monopoly politics is always weird because it's kind of pro-business, so it kind of codes right-wing, but it's also like, there's all sorts of issues of power asymmetry, so there are sort of lefty elements to it, and no one really has centered it as their kind of core thing. So I guess I want to ask about, is Robinson-Patman historically is kind of a rural issue.
Mm-hmm.
Not because it doesn't matter to people in cities, but because it's just that's where the political base has always come from. How does this issue intersect with partisan politics? Who supports the revival of the Robinson-Patman Act in the regulatory agencies, in the states, in Congress? Who is affected by the failure to enforce price discrimination laws? Talk about the politics of the grocery business.
Yeah, I mean, I think the beauty of this and why we've been able to have success in reviving it and building bipartisan support is because it's inherently a both rural and urban issue. Right? Independent grocers are the ones that are in the inner cities, and we're the ones that are in the rural areas. So we find strange allies sometimes that come together to support, leveling the playing field so that, small towns can continue to have a grocery store or we don't have these urban food desert phenomenons. And so that's played well from those members. They saw what happened during COVID. They saw that they couldn't get toilet paper, that they needed for their family. And it pointed to this bigger issue of discriminatory pricing. That plus the fact that you've got farm country, which is really hurting right now, and they're waking up. They really woke up after the Kroger-Albertsons merger, particularly the producer groups who sell more domestically, which happens to be more protein, more produce products. Those are more domestic markets, more in the retail. They're seeing their customers shrink. And when you see your customers shrink, you've got fewer buyers, which means you don't have any pricing power in the marketplace. So farmers are struggling, so they are seeing consolidation at retail being a major problem for their business. And then you relate this back to the big issues that animated antitrust in the first place in the 30s and before that. Labor, we have a lot of studies pointing to when Walmart comes into a market, they suppress wages, there's declines in income. So labor likes this issue. And then, the other retail areas where there's been a lot of problems, you guys have spent a lot of time on your podcast on this. The same dynamics that we see in grocery are happening in pharmacy. Pharmacy shutting down have been supercharged recently. So obviously that's a hot political issue for members of Congress who don't want to see their local pharmacy close. But that has to do with the fact that there's consolidation, there's vertical, arrangements between PBMs, health insurers, and pharmacies where they're able to essentially use that vertical growth and that size to advantage themselves at the disadvantage of the independent pharmacy. So this issue pervades, I think, retail. And the other piece of it is we've been successful at establishing a coalition, Main Street Competition Coalition. You can find us at mainstreetcompetition.com. We are basically a group of restaurants, pharmacies, hotels, bookstores, convenience stores, even online sellers and agriculture producers, and we're all preaching the same thing, which is we need to revive Robinson-Patman. We need to provide some level of a level playing field for retailers and bring back Main Street. I mean, I think at the end of the day, folks in this kind of time in our politics, they're seeing a decline in Main Street retailers succeeding, and that's really what this issue is all about. It's all about the ability of small businesses to compete fairly in a market.
And I think that, what we do see is that people want that. People love their stores. They love their independent businesses, and they work more efficiently. Like you see what Randy was able to do. Like I'll start my own water plant and I'll deliver this at a better price. Well, look, Chris Jones, National Grocers Association and Main Street Competition Coalition, and Randy Arceneaux, independent grocer wholesaler. Thank you so very much for being on Organized Money.
Well, thank you for having us. I
guys.
appreciate it.
It really strikes me that what we are talking about here is, and I think I said this up top, but what we're talking about here is the tyranny of the dollar store or the tyranny of Walmart, right? At every level, if you are just trying to make a go of it, you are just disadvantaged by someone who has access to capital. And that is not how it's ever been in America before.
And what it's crazy is that the most creative people, the people who have to figure out these ways to be the most efficient, are really only doing it so they can eke out a living relative to Walmart or these giant dollar stores. They're not, those savings don't go to the customer. Those savings go so they can survive.
I was totally struck by, if you put your capital into a local store, right? I'm going to put my capital and my labor in there, and I make $1 off of every $100 in sales. And Visa makes $3 off of every $100 in sales off of my investment, right? That's
doing
crazy.
Next to nothing.
Doing nothing. Literally just as like moving something, I'm not
moving a digit in a spreadsheet from one place to the other.
Thank you for me incompetent.
You're sputtering after this interview. You're just sputtering.
I'm sputtering, but
you can see the like Yosemite Sam. You see, like dollar signs and exclamation points coming out.
So here's the basic view I think I'm coming to believe, which is that Louis Brandeis called it other people's money. That was a common expression in the 19th century.
Mm-hmm.
They said the way to get rich in unethical ways to use other people's money for speculation or other forms of or stealing it or whatever. This very much seems to me like, as we're looking at this kind of ecosystem of monopolies surrounding people who work for a living or who have some form of real business, they are exploiting other people's money, right?
Yeah.
They are cream skimming, whether it's, the vendors, whether it's Walmart, whether it's the credit card companies, whether it's, tax breaks, whatever it is. There's a cream skimming here from the people who work for a living. And I think that's what we're learning throughout
Yeah.
all of these episodes, but this one in particular.
Well, it was great to talk to Randy, and it was great to talk to Chris. And we're going to have another great episode for you next week on Organized Money.
Organized money.